Hey, what's up guys? So the idea of the saw traps was to test people if they're willing to do insane things in order to prove that they value their life. But there were a lot of times where people did exactly what was asked of them and they still weren't let go. That's because they were never meant to escape. The trap only existed as a way to kill them off. In this video, we'll look at how many of these rigged traps there are and which one was the most unfair. One of the most blatant times this was done was with the laser collars in Jigsaw. Throughout the movie, we follow Logan Nelson and his colleague as they try to find out what's happening when seemingly new victims of John Kramer appear across the city. However, Kramer has already died, making the investigation even more complex. Towards the end, Logan goes to an abandoned farm where he thinks more traps may be taking place, but there he encounters Detective Halloran. Both of them end up blacking out and wake up in the final game where they are fixed to metal collars with deadly lasers slowly closing in on their necks. In order to escape, both of them must confess to the biggest mistakes they've made in life. Halloran does exactly this, confessing that he took bribes, let criminals walk, and got innocent people convicted for his own gain. But even though it initially seems like he defeated the trap, Logan then describes how he was actually safe in the trap the whole time. Logan was responsible for all the dead bodies found throughout the story and set up the game with people who were in Halloran's failed cases. And the detective was only put in the trap so that Logan could expose his bad practices. It really doesn't matter what Halloran would have said, as Logan had no intention to let him live anyway. But the laser collars weren't really that elaborate, and it didn't really have the same feel as the other games. So another test that was disguised as a trap, even though it was just murder, was the Pendulum room in Saw 5. In the trap, a man wakes up in a dark room tied to a table. It's explained that he can free himself by crushing his hands in the machines on his left and right. If he doesn't do this, a massive pendulum with a blade on the bottom, swinging back and forth, will slowly cut him in half as it's lowered over his body. Even though the man eventually puts his hand in the presses and crushes his hands, the pendulum continues to sink and he dies. It's only explained later that he was the murderer of Hoffman's sister, and as it's explored throughout the series, Hoffman clearly doesn't have the same ideals as John Kramer. He pretty much only wants to kill people in these elaborate ways without actually giving them a chance to survive. Now this next one, even though it was rigged, the person in it surprisingly still made it out alive. But the idea of the trap was for it to be unbeatable, and that's the water cube in Saw 5. After the events of Saw 3, Detective Strahm is in the final room where John Kramer got killed. Hoffman then locks him in here, forcing Strahm to follow another path which leads into a dark hallway where he gets attacked. A short while later, he wakes up with his head stuck in a cube. He isn't actually given any task. All he's supposed to do is sit here and wait until the cube fills with water. What makes this trap so unique and effective is the fact that his arms and legs are still free to move around. It's just his head that's stuck. But the trap doesn't actually end the way we think. As the cube fills with water, leaving Strahm unable to breathe, he takes the pen and gives himself a tracheotomy so that he can breathe from outside the box. Next up, we have a trap that I think most people don't believe is rigged, but I can guarantee you that it was meant to be 100% impossible, and that is the glass coffin also in Saw 5. What happens is that after Strahm gets closer and closer to exposing Hoffman as the Jigsaw killer, the clues lead him to the basement of the nerve gas house. In there, he goes into a dark room where he sees a glass box. He plays a nearby tape which says that Strahm should simply step in the coffin and that will allow him to live. But he disobeys Jigsaw's orders, after which he is ambushed by Hoffman. They get into a fight and Strahm manages to put Hoffman into his own trap, but then the door to the room locks and the walls start closing in. Hoffman's coffin is then lowered into the ground where you can see how Strahm gets crushed while he's in a safe place. Now most people think that Strahm should have gotten into the box and he would come out alive, but you have to consider the context of the trap. Strahm was led here because he wanted to find out who Jigsaw was, and he's already suspecting Hoffman since there are too many coincidences. Also, Hoffman followed him down here. Now here's my theory. If Strahm got into the coffin, Hoffman would show that he has a way to stop the walls from closing in on him, and he'd have Strahm exactly where he wants, locked in a box where he will slowly rot away. The moving walls only served as a backup in case Strahm was able to beat him somehow. Again, some people think that Hoffman would let him live, but that simply wouldn't make sense. Think about it, if Strom made it out, he could expose Hoffman, who would have died in his own trap. That doesn't make any sense since he has no interest in any of the John Kramer logic or tests or any of that stuff. Hoffman just wants to kill. Either way, this trap was just another setup, just like the cube. Hoffman had been trying to get rid of Strom since the beginning of Saw 5, and this was just another way to eliminate the risk of him being caught as the killer. Now, the very first time we actually got a rigged test was in Saw 3 with a classroom trap. I actually miscategorized this one in an earlier video as being technically beatable, which was a mistake on my part. So we've seen this one before. Troy wakes up in a room and is told that he needs to remove all the rings from his body before the bomb in the room goes off. By removing all the rings, he's supposedly free to escape the room, but this was impossible in a number of ways. First of all, the final ring in his body was connected to his jaw, and it's virtually impossible to just rip that one out. And when we see the aftermath of the trap and all the detectives looking at it, Carrie remarks how the door was welded shut, meaning that even if Troy, by some miracle, removed all of the rings, he still wouldn't have been able to escape. He would go to the exit door, see that it's locked off, and with it being impossible to leave, he can only stand there and wait until the timer on the bomb reaches 0. This was one of the first traps we saw, by the way, that was set up not by John Kramer, but by Amanda, one of Jigsaw's many apprentices. And he later goes on to remark that Amanda's trap was impossible, and it's not what he would have done. It's funny how each one of his apprentices does exactly the opposite of what John wanted. Each one of these guys have put people into traps with absolutely zero intention of letting them escape. But then again, John also set up a few booby traps where he kind of just punished people who didn't deserve it. Now, the following trap isn't necessarily rigged, it wasn't designed to be, but the way it was used made it unbeatable, or at least that was the intention. And that is the reverse bear trap in Saw 7 and the reverse bear trap 2.0. The first time we see this trap being rigged is in Saw 6. Since Hoffman isn't really doing what John wanted him to do, John left his ex-wife Jill an updated reverse bear trap. At the end of the movie, Jill electrocutes Hoffman and ties him to a chair. Then she places the machine on his head and gives him about a minute until he dies. Unfortunately for Jill, Hoffman is able to cheat his way out of the trap by placing it in between two horizontal metal rods on the door and then ripping his face out of the machine. Even though this left him heavily injured, Hoffman still made his way out of the trap that was merely set up for him to die. Next up is another one from Hoffman, and it's the ice cube trap from Saw 4. Here we see Eric and Hoffman on a scale. If it takes Officer Rigg too long to reach this mysterious room, too much of the ice will melt, the scale would tip over and Hoffman would supposedly get electrocuted. Also, if Rigg walks through the door into the trap to help his friends, a chain reaction would release two massive ice blocks and smash Eric's head. Now again, some people may think that Hoffman was actually in danger here, but you have to remember that he set up the trap and he wouldn't put himself into a deadly scenario. He was also able to free himself at the end, proving that he wasn't actually tied down. And if you know the Saw franchise, you know that Hoffman was trying to take out everyone who was working on the Jigsaw case. This includes Eric, Carrie, Rigg, and Strom. This means that he was only here to ensure that the trap ended the way he wanted it to, with everyone dead so that he can walk out of here as the lone survivor and make up a heroic story. Finally, the biggest bullshit trap in my opinion, without any other one coming even close, is the angel trap in Saw 3. This movie already starts out with a rigged trap, and after Allison Carey returns home from working on the Jigsaw case, she ends up in her own test, and it's also rigged. She's in the angel trap where her ribs are connected to this machine where two arms will tear them off. Now, as the puppet explains, Carey is simply too good of a detective. She put too many criminals behind bars, and now she must be punished? What? Anyway, there are actually rules to this game. She's told that the machine can be unlocked with a key, but that key is in a beaker of acid suspended from the ceiling. Surprisingly enough, Carrie manages to get the key. She tries unlocking the device, but finds herself still stuck inside. Then Amanda approaches her, and the trap goes off anyway, even though she did exactly what she was told to do. This is because, again, Amanda rigged the trap with no intention of letting Carrie walk out of here. We've seen Carrie in the first and second movie leading the charge in the Jigsaw investigation, so to see her die so unfairly was not very fun. But wait, I also included one bonus one from Spiral from the Book of Saw. As Ezekiel Banks tries to find out who this Jigsaw copycat is, it's revealed that his father Marcus has already been abducted. When Ezekiel finally sees who is behind the latest games, he's told that there is one more test. He's led to a room where he sees Marcus suspended from the ceiling while various tubes drain the blood out of his body. Zeke is told that he has one bullet and a gun, and the police are on their way and will be here exactly after the trap is over. It's kind of confusing, but that's how it's set up. Now Zeke can either save his father or kill the murderer. Now in order to help Marcus, he must shoot a target. This will trigger something that releases him onto the floor. Eventually, Zeke decides to spare the killer to save his dad. And even though he successfully does what he was told to do, the killer has designed the trap in such a way that when the police enter the room, Marcus is yanked back up into the air again, and his arm is pulled to point a weapon at the officers. The police then shoot Marcus, and the killer gets away. Again, even though this one was so ridiculous. Again, even though Zeke did exactly what he was told to do and followed the rules as they were presented to him, Marcus is still killed. It was probably never the killer's intention to let him go, but instead only to set all of this up to punish Marcus for his corrupt past. So those are some of the most prominent rigged traps that we've seen. By the way, I didn't include any of the smaller booby traps because those aren't really traps. These would be things like the explosive puppet or the sentry gun trap, the shotgun booby trap, or the electrified cage and the cyanide box. Anyways, as always, I hope you liked it and that I get to see you guys in the next video. Bye guys.